Hi, I'm Phil Harbottle, and this is my 45th video discussing 1950s British science fiction. Incidentally, this video, like my last one, is being filmed for me by my very young grandson, Arthur King, the brother of Eleanor, who is now away at Warwick University. Say hello, Arthur.
Hi.
I'd like to continue my recent theme by showing another selection of rarely seen paperbacks, which some collectors may never have seen. And more pertinently, they are all books I haven't already featured. The question is, are these books worth collecting at all? The answer is not clear-cut, being yes in some cases, but emphatically no in most. Collecting post-war mushroom science fiction paperbacks is a very broad church. Some collectors are simply obsessional completists who like to discover and collect everything, irrespective of merit. Some collectors, in my experience mostly Americans, simply collect these books for their covers and rarely actually read the books. And most of those collectors don't really care if the covers are good or bad, artistically or scientifically speaking. The more garish, stupid and lurid they are, the better they seem to like them. The very few elitist collectors are those who like to pick and choose just a representative sampling of those titles which are actually worth reading. I could go on to describe several other subcategories, such as rarity, but you get my point. In my own long series of videos, I hope to have appealed to and helped all types of collectors. And this video is again cast in this vein. Let me know in the comments if you'd like more. The following 20 books I'm describing are all rare. Now, in this first row here, we see some books that are not worth reading, being atrociously written rubbish. We lead with the Stanley Baker Fantastic Science Thriller series, 5 titles published in 1954. The first 4 were priced only 9pence, being 64 pages of very small print. Obviously modelled on Pearson's Concurrent Tidbits series, but greatly inferior in all respects. The 5th book is a larger format and accordingly was priced at £1. Conquerors of Space was attributed to Errol Collins, who surprisingly had been an established writer for children since the 1940s. Here, writing under pseudonyms, he was irresponsible for the first 4 titles. This last book opened with a super hydrogen bomb exploding the planet Earth into radioactive dust, with all life destroyed. Unfortunately, the 100-strong crew of an interplanetary spaceship survive, so will have to endure their wearisome adventuring. The standard background for the earlier books is one where humanoid Martians and Venusians make up the mixed crews of spaceships, and prime ministers regularly chat to their alien counterparts on other planets via radio and television without any time lag. The speed of light is also exceeded by spaceships, leading to interstellar daring-do for the hackneyed characters, who sometimes include school children looking forward to the next treat of fish and chips. Unbelievable space opera at its most juvenile and idiotic level. But I've no doubt some of our American people will want to collect these atrocious books because they like the garish covers. They're ridiculous subject matter, but quite well executed by artist Shilton. You can just maybe make out his signature there. Artist Shilton. Now then, with these stories clearly aimed at children or the mentally retarded, one especially disturbing and disgusting aspect of this wretched series was that the last 2 titles here both contain the same sinister advertisement. Bear with me, I still show the sinister advert. And the other one. There we see them. Same as the fine art photographs from a so-called model photographic service. This dubious, sleazy enterprise was hilariously satirised at the time by Spike Milligan in his BBC radio series The Goon Show, with Peter Sellers answering these same type of advertisements, posing as a keen art student in his Major Bloodnok persona. We have a more disgusting example from 1953, Tremor by Frank Lederman, whoever the hell he was. Reads more like a writer of sleazy gangster stories. Mercifully a one-off title, it was issued by K Publications, whose publisher was amongst those prosecuted by the watch committees. It's only collected today because of its lurid cover painting by a slumming Ron Turner. Our next 1953 title, The Moon Monsters, by another unknown, Roy Marquis, was from a similar publisher, Barrington Gray. It was different only in that instead of being sleazy, it read like a children's fairy tale, featuring the King of the Moon Men, King of the bloody Moon Men, who ruled in a warm underground world inside the moon. Utter tripe. Next, we have two utterly mediocre books from Brown Watson, published in 1953 and 54 respectively. Both are by unknown authors writing under house names and not worth reading. Sinister Forces by Alvin Westwood is notable only for its superb Ron Turner cover, and Return to Mars by Elton Westwood is similarly only collectible because of its attractive Gordon C. Davies cover. Planet War by Fish, real name Leonard G. Fish, is a wretched book that has nothing to commend it. Published by Archer Press in 1953, it has a silly cartoony cover by Gerald Facey, and if anyone could get past it, they'd find an unreadable mess of space opera. It features the ludicrous adventures of Captain John Forrest, a man who, the book tells us, who had almost before he could walk, learned how to handle a spaceship. Avoid this book at all costs, unless you are a mad completist. We open the second line with a rarely seen first novel by Francis G. Rea, Realm of the Alien, published in 1947 by Grafton under the pseudonym of Chester Del Rey, not to be confused with the noted American author Lester Del Rey. Rea made his writing debut as an author of juvenile stories, and this space opera has a juvenile aspect. But it is interesting and collectible as one of the earliest examples of post-war science fiction paperbacks in Britain. Another early title, which we see there, is Terror Trap, a collection of original short stories by my fellow Geordie, Norman A. Lazenby, published by Shenstone Press in 1949. The 4 stories in it were of a variable quality, most of them only fair, but it is worth collecting for its single outstanding story, The Designers. Next, we have 2 interesting books which may be unknown to many collectors because they were not issued by a mushroom publisher. Their publisher, the British Publishers Guild, was not usually associated with science fiction. Both are reprints of much earlier hardcover titles. Life Comes to Seathorpe by Neil Bell, aka Stephen Southwold, was a reprint of his 1946 hardcover novel published by Ian Spottiswoode. It was a noted literary novel, nowadays classified as a scientific romance, involving the artificial creation of giant insects. It was specially revised by the author for this very collectible 1953 edition. The Dr. Fu Manchu series of novels by Sax Rohmer is not generally considered by some to be science fiction, but several of its weird menace elements touch on super science, and Fu Manchu is an archetypal mad scientist. This book, The Mystery of Dr. Fu Manchu, was first published in 1916 in this 1953 paperback with its beautiful James McConnell cover, not to mention the back cover advert by the great Reg Heed. is surely very collectible. Moving on, we come to The Threatened People by George Borodin. This was a retitled reprint of Spurious Sun, a 1948 hardcover telling of an atomic accident that threatens to sterilize the world. Its author, who also wrote as George Sarver, was an experienced popular novelist, and this was his first science fiction novel. This 1954 regular paperback is an interesting collector's item. Next, we have two paperback reprints of S. Fowler Wright's earlier titles, The Island of Captain Sparrow, 1928, and The Screaming Lake, 1937. These were reprinted in 1953 by Regal Books, and I suspect Regal may have been a short-lived imprint of the author himself, with quite a small print run. Wright's best work was published pre-war, when he was quite famous as a contemporary of H.G. Wells, but his reputation has sadly waned over the decades. Both books have a very neat, perfect bound format with coloured edges, which you can see the coloured edges. It's unusual on British books. And they were perfect bound, no rusty staples. And they should be quite valuable, but alas they're not. I can't understand why this should be so. The Island of Captain Sparrow is a classic lost race story, The Screaming Lake much less so, but still scarce and collectible. We end this video with the only 3 sky and science fiction titles that were not written by John Russell Fearn or E.C. Tubb. In 1951, pleased with the sales of Fearn's Vargo Stanton novels, Scion tried to cash in by introducing new authors. Alas, the 2 choices were complete flops, and neither author was invited back. Sister Earth by Arnold Reed was a dire, plodding narrative, not helped by a mediocre George Radcliffe cover. Spawn of Space by the pseudonymous Franz Harkon was even direr. Rubbishy trivia, it sank without trace, despite having a splendidly lurid Ron Turner cover, the only reason it's collected today. The last title here, published near the end of 1952, Burning Void, by the absurdly named Vector McGroon, was even worse, and appears to have been a panic replacement after Fearn resigned from his contract. Very likely, Burning Void had been hastily edited from the slush pile by Scion's then editor Julian Franklin when his supply of Stanton titles was running out. The So-So Space cover was by George Radcliffe. Again, this book is for completists only. You have been warned.